Hello, love. I'm Ashley Miley, and this is the Sacred Intimacy Temple, a podcast exploring love, sex, and relationships as a sacred spiritual path. Each episode is a remembrance of sacred intimacy, first with yourself, and then with Source, your beloved, family, and community. Come home to the temple within. Let's begin. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Sacred Intimacy Temple podcast. And also welcome back to this beautiful series, Coming Home to Intimacy. So we are on episode 4 out of 8. And so we are about halfway through now. And I'd love to just invite you to take a moment to sort of think about, what you've heard thus far. And what's maybe one piece that you've taken away that you've really sort of sat with and simmered with a little bit. Maybe even calling that piece to mind in this moment and getting curious. When you bring this piece to mind, what part of your body sort of lights up? Another way to maybe ask is where does this piece that's simmering, this kind of piece, where does that live in your body? Just noticing that. Even something that you may not fully understand what it is, or maybe what you need to do about it, or what it looks like, or something like that. It lives already in your body. And in that way, that part of your body holds the knowing around this, holds the truth, holds the wisdom. It's not something you have to go find or figure out, or you don't even have to tune into your body in this moment today, right here, right now. But just really remembering that it's already there. And that was a big piece, I think a big message from the last episode. And I think it's a really important thread to kind of bring back to this episode. So in this episode, we're really looking at what is the path of sacred intimacy. And I want to start with this thread of it already lives in your body because, again, intimacy, your ability to be intimate, to connect, to relate to other people, it already exists within you. You know how. There is an innate coding within you that knows how. You have just forgotten. And not forgotten because you're not enough, you're not worthy, you're not lovable, you're fucked up, whatever stories you have going on. None of that. You've just forgotten. It's natural to forget. That's why we cycle between remembering and forgetting. And forgetting can be really holy, really sacred. And in that also, there's a part of you that already knows how your path of intimacy looks like in this lifetime, what you're here for, what lessons, what experiences, etc. Because not everyone's path looks the same. And that's okay. It's not, the path of sacred intimacy is not this almost A plus B equals C kind of thing, or everyone will experience this and then this and this and this. I might even kind of name some, for example, different pieces. I kind of see the path of sacred intimacy as this multi-layered initiation. So there's different thresholds of initiation. Some of those might not resonate for you. I also see each initiatory threshold having multiple different stages. Some of those may not resonate with you, and that's totally okay. This is just sort of my take on it, what I have experienced and seen and what's been shown to me thus far, and you get to choose to take it or leave it. Take what resonates and leave the rest. Because at the end of the day, you are the beholder of your path. And that's another important thread that I think is important to bring to this conversation is that, again, intimacy is a path to walk. And in that, it means that there's kind of this engagement, this consistent engagement with it, this consistent time, energy, resource brought to it. That it's not just something that happens and then it's like, oh, check, we're done, cool. Yes, you have certain kind of like moments, if you will, where it's like, oh, I'm in a relationship and I want to get married. Oh, got married. Okay, cool. But it's like, well, like just because you're married doesn't mean like, oh, now we're good forever. Don't ever have to think about it, worry about it again. No, that is not true. And I would like to lovingly just invite you to let that idea go, because it's really not true and it's really not helpful. It is a path to walk. It is a path to embody. It is a constant experience of your life. It is a way of being. Being intimate is a way of being. Just like you can have a sense of being an achiever and accomplishing things and whatever, you can bring that to intimacy in this way of just recognizing that it takes time, energy, and consistent time and energy, and making a choice to lean into that. Because it is a choice. Not everyone's meant to make that choice in this lifetime. Not every season are you going to make that choice. And just being attuned to that within yourself is really important. And so with those two threads sort of presented, I think in general, like, as I've said before, and I've realized this more in hindsight, as I spoke in the first episode, there was my own sort of vision of my own life that was brought to me that sort of was, for lack of a better term, the embodiment of this path of sacred intimacy. And even what I would call as my business, like the Sacred Intimacy Temple, and what this podcast is titled and all that, it was an embodiment, like that's like a word, like a title in a way to just kind of name the embodiment of that vision. And when I really saw it initially, it was just like, this is what I'm here to do. This is what I'm here to experience. Huh, cool. But it was so profound. I wish I could articulate in words like the level of profound, visceral remembrance that vision was and is still yet. The amount of like knowing that was behind it, the amount of like emotion, things that I had never been able to connect to that I could viscerally feel. And even again, like the visceral feeling of that experience in this moment, even if potentially, for example, there are ways that my life does not reflect that in this current moment. And so as I like, in some ways, that was like my invitation to the path in a way. It was like my invitation to the path of sacred intimacy. And I chose that path. I was like, yes, I'm here for this. And I chose that path well knowing that it would not be easy and that it would have its challenges, especially given some threads of my own personal story. And for me, like that really exemplifies the devotion I have. And my like devotion is one of the things. I think devotion in a way is a little bit different than resilience. They're similar, but they're different. And my devotion is one of my most favorite parts of myself. And it's also one of the parts of myself that I'm like the most proud of. Does not mean I always show up with devotion. Does not mean that I'm always like, yes, here's the next challenge. I'm so excited to be challenged. I also have my own human resistance as like, oh, Jesus, like, really? Like, we got to go through this again? Like, can we not? Like, or like, where the fuck is the thing? Like, I've been showing up. I'm devotional. Like, so I just want to also say, like, devotion's not this kind of like, oh, it's all taken care of. It's all fine. No. But devotion is this kind of like really soft grit that it's like, I know like the truth in this. And I know that that is the truth I came here for. And I know that part of all of that is knowing that there's like human challenge, knowing that there's that like challenge that I've agreed to in this lifetime. And I am a yes to that. And I will like be a yes to that in a way that is self-honoring and it holds self-reverence, because also we don't have to be these like sacrificial lambs to ourselves either. And so when I said yes to that path, when I started walking that, and am still, like, again, it's a path for a lifetime. It is a way of being for a lifetime. So I am on this just as much as any of you are. I'm a few steps ahead, where I've, met my invitation and I've said yes to it. Or I'm, in a certain phase of it. And you might be in a different phase, you might be in the same, who knows? But what started to happen when I started saying yes and I started walking through that path is that this vision started to reveal like a degree of like a blueprint and medicine to me. And it became really clear that it's like, one, I will always say that as a person who holds space, as a person who puts ideas out there in the world, it is important to be trained. It is important to hold integrity in that way, to be educated in what you're talking about, what you're offering, what you're, sharing with others. And from a place of like the ways that you come into that being held in integrity. But I also deeply believe that like much of our own wisdom and medicine comes from our own embodiment, comes from our own path. So it was very clear to me from the get-go. It's like, well, walking this path is going to teach me something. And clearly in this vision, I'm supposed to be this medicine woman of relationships and sex. So clearly I must have something to share about it. And I'm like, I don't know what it is yet, but we'll get there. But like starting to walk this path and like seeing the blueprint that was coming through, where it was like, here's what you're going to walk. It made me realize like, wait a second, like this is like part of the medicine. This is what I'm here to share. This is a framework. This is a whatever I'm here to offer to other people. Because I think, I know that there is resonance to that there's some truth. And that truth is like, it's not just my ideas. It's not just like, it's like this beknownst innate knowing of what it is to relate. Understanding the certain components to it. Understanding this ancient understanding of relating and intimacy. And so as sort of that was being revealed to me and sort of the framework that I'm about to kind of speak through, and again, understanding like, oh, when this is happening in my life, this is what it's really showing me. This is what I'm here to learn. And like, there's a part of me that leans into things now, even when I don't want to, because it's like, this is part of my medicine. So it's like, I am called to this. Like, and in that, I know that I actually have capacity and the ability to move through it. I just haven't remembered it all yet. But what then became another layer to this that, again, feels really important to name about just this idea of like, we innately all know how to relate. That is something that cannot be taken away from us. It is not tarnished. It is not forgotten. There is also this collective experience of that. And I started reading more ancient texts about some of these like divine unions between goddesses and gods, Mary Magdalene and Yeshua, these different like sort of religional components. The same signature that I got in my body when I saw my vision, and then I started understanding the kind of medicine it was here to offer and the ways I was working with that in myself, how that showed up in my body, how that lit up in my body. Like when I would read these stories and read the wisdom that was coming through these texts, the same things would light up. And it kind of brought me into this like space in a way of sort of my capacity to be able to see the unknown and like see the unknown in a way of feeling in my body. Like it helped me understand that it's like, there's this thorough thread that has connected all of this. And I've just had the opportunity to connect to that thread, to remember it to some degree, to be on the path of deeply remembering it. And again, offering this to you because you have this ability too. I'm not anything special. I mean, I am special and I'm pretty awesome and great. But it's not like I'm like some chosen, like something who's like, oh, only she gets to connect to this thread. No, we're all connected to this thread. We all have access to this thread. We just have to find our own unique way to it. And this framework that I'm about to sort of explain through is part of that. And it is a way that you can sort of try it on. And then again, like try it on, find what works, leave the rest. So to start off with, the Sacred Intimacy Temple, the name of this podcast, the name of my business, it also is very representative of this vision. And it becomes very representative of like the community and the knowing of that community in the world, and how, again, like people come to this community to learn, to remember, and then go take that and create it in their own world, in their own pocket of the world, in their own way. It's kind of representative of all that. Even though I do feel pretty sure that like the community won't be called that, but it'll be that this entity, this whatever, will be housed in that community. It was really clear to me that we all like, or I should say many of us, desire like partnership. There's something really unique and profound about partnership, because in a way that other relationships can't trigger us, partnership will. And it usually, what I have found, calls us forth really profoundly in a way that, say, like sometimes, and again, like this doesn't have to be true for everyone, but for me personally, like the experience of partnership calls me in a different way than friendship or even like family or community. And like threads, for example, I think family relationships can be really challenging, and I have very challenging family relationships. And like the way I get triggered in that context and what's being called of me in that context is very different than what is called upon me in relationship, like in partnership. What I've noticed, and again, this may not be true for everyone, in partnership, I get called in this way that is really about this understanding of like, how do I hold myself and how do I be with myself and how do I bring that into the world, like lean into that in the world and co-create in the world from that. In family, I experience it more as like there's certain just like wounds that I haven't seen in myself or haven't been able to access that layer, and it usually calls me to that. And if I'm able to sort of tend to that in myself and hold that in myself, it naturally sort of shifts the dynamic here. There's something about partnership where there's more of this collaborative experience, and it's more about expanding my capacity and my curiosity for other people, and in that having a really profound co-creation, and it not just being about me in a way. And again, you know, this can all shift over time. This is just how I see it right now. And what I think is unique about families is like, yes, families are built on like individual relationships, but also when I think about family, I also kind of want to speak more to the like collective field where it's like there's multiple people in that field versus in partnership, it's like one-on-one. And like the relationship you have to yourself is in a way one-on-one. Your relationship to source is kind of like one-on-one relationship. But once you get into a family system, even though it's built on multiple one-on-one relationships, which have to be tended to, there's also this overlap of all of the people in that having this overlap of like how the system exists or how even like a few people in that system exist together. So like if you think about, let's say like a family of 4. So you have like 2 parents and you have 2 kids. So like, again, like each parent has a one-on-one relationship with each kid. The parents have a relationship. The siblings have a relationship. But there's also a relationship between like both parents and one child. There's also a relationship between the 4 of them. And so that's when I think about this framework, there's kind of that distinction in that way. But when I originally saw this vision and was kind of being brought to the understanding about these initiatory thresholds of sacred intimacy, it was really important, first and foremost, that the idea of sacred intimacy is not just about partnership. It is very built on that, because if you can master that one-on-one experience, especially in a very triggering context, you will be able to have the capacity to expand and hold a multi-person field, if you will, whether that be community or family or kind of constellations of friendship or whatever it may be. And so it became really clear to me that having a piece of like, I was already very much walking a path of being connected and intimate with myself, but seeing the partnership that was in this vision for me, the family that was in this, the community, it really made it clear to me that it's like the path of sacred intimacy starts with that relationship to yourself. From that place, you expand your capacity for the alchemy within partnership. And when you have really anchored this third entity of the relationship and are holding two sovereign poles that come together in this like connection and co-creation, that changes what is possible in family. And that is part of the experimentation. And then that all feeds into just like a larger collective community. And community also encompasses friendships and things like that, and like larger kind of constellations of people. And that each one, like the skills, the experiences you have within yourself in your own, what I call inner sacred union, they prepare you for what you need to move into like sacred union, which is partnership. But in partnership, when you're in that kind of initiation, the skills, the experiences you have, some things will be brand new. Some things will be a deepening or a refinement of what you had to develop first and foremost within yourself. And again, the same goes as you sort of move up. And so there are these initiatory thresholds of like inner sacred union, sacred family, as I call it, and sacred community. And you progress through these initiations. And to walk that, like to have that whole kind of initiation, is the path of sacred intimacy over the lifetime. It is an acknowledgement of all the different types of relationships and how everything feeds and how every relationship is important. And it requires different yielding of the field. It requires different skills, but they're all important, and they all together create the experience of intimacy that you hold within your lifetime. I also think it's important to sort of orient you. One reason I choose the word intimacy is because to me, it's a very deep interweaving of relational moments and sexual moments. And to me, those two things are almost one and the same, even though, for example, like we are living in a family. If we go back to that 4-person family, like I talked about, like clearly and hopefully, and I know this is not truly true in the world right now, but I hope one day it is, like only like the parents are having, sex with each other. There's no sort of horrific dynamics going on, but there's still a way that when you expand the definition of what you believe sexuality is, and even if we're just talking about how you orient kids to sexuality, how you orient them to their life force, to pleasure, that's part of how sexuality kind of feeds into this like community or this family kind of initiation. But intimacy is the interweaving of both of these, realizing that it's not just relationship, it's not just sex, it's not thinking that they're separate, because they're very interconnected. Some of the dynamics that people experience or some of the challenges people experience in sex is actually solely built on the relational challenges, And then sex becomes this weird, like this place where you just kind of play it out awkwardly. And you're just like, oh, this is not working. And I don't know why. And it's because like you're looking at it like at the level of the problem and you're not kind of seeing beyond it, where it's like, it's actually the relational piece that's like getting in the way of this sex stuff. And it's not always that, but I just find that often is like a layer at play that people don't understand. And so I say that first and foremost. But so you go through these sort of different initiatory thresholds. And at each initiatory threshold, at each sort of experience of how you cultivate sacred intimacy within your life, there is these different stages. So the stages are conscious, sacred, and divine. Now, I'm going to just give a little overview about each one, but all I have to say is that, honestly, if we all relatively got to a place of consciousness in all of our relationships, the world would be vastly different. And like the world would be in a great place. And it'd be like, awesome. And also like, the sacred intimacy temple in some ways is really about anchoring in this stage of sacredness in every single kind of context of relationship. Doesn't mean that there can't be play and experimentation and embodiment at that divine level. And in some ways to move through. there is like a connection to that that's a necessity. And again, in that way, like, it doesn't mean the world can't return to that, because I actually do believe over time, like, that's where it's going, but we have to acknowledge where we're starting. And it feels really true and clear to me that it's like that sacred stage is so important to anchor into this world right now, to come back to. And so the way that I kind of see these different stages, and I'm going to talk about this more simplistically, maybe through this idea of like the inner sacred union initiation, so that we're building a relationship to ourselves. We're coming into self-intimacy in a way. When we're talking about the conscious stage, it's really about developing awareness. It's becoming conscious to what's actually going on. So for example, like conscious self-intimacy, conscious like inner conscious union, it can look like you're becoming aware of like, wow, I had never thought to myself about some of the experiences I had in my childhood, and I'm realizing that they weren't okay. I'm realizing the ways that I was harmed, that I was hurt. I'm realizing the wounds I have from there. And you're starting to have a capacity to sit with that awareness. You're really expanding your awareness, and you're developing a level of capacity. Sometimes I think about this as like, for example, some people might kind of come into spirituality or sort of start a connection to it through meditation. So maybe it's even just something as simple as like you build your capacity because you're willing to meditate for 10 minutes a day. Even if your meditation is focused on, you know, being calmer or not being anxious or something, you're developing capacity to be with discomfort. It could look like, you know, going to a yoga class. And I know for me, like I've done a lot of yin yoga, and yin yoga, you can really look at it as like a body meditation where it's just like, we're observing like what's going on in the body. And we're just like, huh, interesting. And I'm just being with it. I'm breathing with it. It's uncomfortable, but I'm staying with it. Or maybe like it's so uncomfortable that I know I have enough awareness and whatever that it's like, actually, I need to get out of this pose. And that's how you sort of develop your capacity in the stage of kind of like conscious, like inner conscious union. And so then I think for many of us, I can say this from my own story, like there becomes sort of a threshold where it's like you're aware of a lot of things. You've started to dabble in some things. You've got some capacity going on. Maybe it's even like you're self-caring. So it's like, oh, I need self-care. So I'm going to like take myself to a coffee shop and read my favorite book. I'm going to go on a walk outside. All those things resource you and give you a little bit more capacity. But then you realize like, there's actually a lot more to go through, and there's a lot more to sort of be with and digest. And like, I need to actually do that if I want to shift my experience or to really like come back into my truth and myself, to feel more confident, to feel more connected, to feel more secure in myself, for example. And so that is where you sort of move into the sacred stage. So inner sacred union is really about coming deeply back into the body, not just having that awareness of the conscious mind, but really coming back into the body, expanding the body's capacity even deeper to be with discomfort, so much so that you're able to sort of alchemize what's in the body. You're able to shift it. You're able to digest it. You really start to bring in deeper somatic tools in this stage. We move into embodiment in this stage. If you have the calling to, self-pleasure can also be a really powerful practice of alchemy as well, in a way that we don't always think about. And so this is where we're really digesting things. That's one kind of part of the stage. And then we're also really getting curious about like, what are the parts of me that have the capacity to relate in the way that I desire, or to, you know, move through the world with more security and connection to myself. And it's starting to embody those parts. And from that, we then move into inner divine union. And inner divine union, or sort of more like the divine stage, is really this like mastery. of embodiment, this mastery of having capacity to be with what is and to digest that, to clear space, to be able to call things in, and this mastery of being in that dance. And also it's a deeper calling to how you start to sort of like co-create on this higher level with like goddess, God, source, however you might identify with it, a higher power, where, you know, there's a component of like moving beyond like your own preferences. This is where in yourself, when you're in your own relationship, it becomes a lot more about, you know, like, what is the truth? Not what is my preference, like not what is what I want, but what is the truth of this moment, of this experience? This is where it's like you can be more connected to like those kind of big life things where it's like, now that I'm connected to myself and I'm aware of what's going on in my body, I'm aware that this job is really harmful to me. And it would be scary to leave it because it provides a level of security, but actually my truth is to leave it. That is the truth. I need to move into something else. And so it's like you're following that truth. Sometimes it's that component of like surrender as well, where it's like you're going to receive a truth and it's like you're going to have to surrender to it. You're being available to co-creation. You're being available to that. There's something beyond what you can conceptualize is here for you. And being attuned to that and being willing to lean into that. And like the kind of refinement and the sharpening of the sword in a way of your skills, of your capacity, of your gifts, that like inner divine union calls you into. It becomes very much like the bridge that brings you into the next initiatory threshold. And so, for example, when you're in the stage of like the inner sacred union initiation and you're sort of in that divine stage in a way, you're being, and in this maybe more context of intimacy, you're being called to like a relationship beyond what you think is possible, beyond what you have seen, beyond what you understand how to create or maintain. You're being called to play more on the world, to be seen, to be heard, to be known, however that like looks and manifests for you. And in meeting that, that can really allow you to move then into, you know, sacred union initiation. And it's not, these things can also be sort of coexisting because again, like we're always sort of on a path with ourselves in our own relationship. We are always like in our partnership while we have family, but we get to sort of like sharpen and challenge and expand ourselves. And it's like, for example, you might be kind of moving into that like divine exploration within yourself where you're like, what is the truth here? What is this higher experience of my life that's calling me? Well, for example, you're beginning a beautiful relationship and you guys are sort of in that conscious stage where you're just kind of getting awareness of like what's going on between the two of you and what you both hold and like what your capacity is and being curious about like what is possible here for us to kind of alchemize, co-create, move into. And those two things can be happening at the same time. You could be really deep in sacred union with a partner in that sacred stage where you're really like alchemizing some deep, deep shit. And it's like getting juicy on like, what's on the other side of that? And you've just started a family and you're getting some level of consciousness, like of like, oh, like, what is it like to have a child and like to have a family? And like, maybe it's like there's already children, but there's kind of this like, you know, the blending family experience where it's like you're blending the family and that. And it's like, when that family comes together, what does this look like? What does this feel like? What is this? And you're getting that awareness while, again, like you're in a really juicy place with the partnership. And so you're kind of always, these things are coexisting, co-creating together, moving together. It's not sort of like such a definitive. And again, we can have moments of life, like big sort of seasons where we get kind of thrusted back to like the conscious stage. I often find in that, we're kind of really deepening our embodiment of something. We're really stepping into like an up level, if you will. And it's, not a necessity to have gone through a certain thing to kind of be able to move through these different relationships, because these different relationships always exist. But I do really find that coming back to ourselves, building that really deep relationship with ourselves, having that as an anchor point, as a foundation of where we sort of start practicing some of these maybe new relational skills for ourselves, or we become clear about certain things in relationship. It makes it easier to then go into relationship and be able to wield the field with whatever might be occurring or going on in that experience. And so as we move through these different initiatory layers, thresholds, we move through the different stages, there's some different interwoven bodies of work that really come through this space. So one piece is trauma resolution. For me, trauma resolution is really the makeup of somatic work and also to some degree embodiment, the union of those two bodies of work. They're different, but they're very powerful and they're put together. And I have found that when we kind of bring those two bodies of work together in an appropriate sequence and at the right time, like that is what helps with trauma resolution. And it gives us, again, it expands our capacity. It regulates our nervous systems. It's a huge foundational piece of being able to go into these deeper layers of eventually sort of relational and sexuality work. And there's a fine difference between like trauma resolution work and relational work. So for example, and sexuality work. So for example, if you have gone through sexual trauma, there is a part of your healing that requires you to really be in the trauma resolution sort of space, where it's like you're developing your capacity through somatic practices. You're releasing and moving and digesting things through embodiment. But at some point, you actually have to move into sexuality work. And there's ways that those things interweave together, but sexuality work can be very different. And as someone who has experienced relational and sexual trauma, I've been in a lot of spaces where all those, like one, there's not a distinction and there's not an understanding that it's like they are kind of different bodies of work, although they very much interweave together. But oftentimes there's not spaces where it's like all of that is held and an understanding of all that gets to be there. Because it's like, for example, if you've gone through sexual trauma, some of your sexuality work is actually about recognizing like, what are the flavors of sex that I'm here for? What do I want to experience in sex? And for all we know, there can be, say, components of like dominant, submissive dynamics that you're actually really fascinated into. But at the same time, if your sexual trauma was fed by power dynamics, like imbalance of power dynamics, as you're kind of tussling in that space and learning and experiencing that space, there's a way that it's like, how do we sort of like massage with this like trauma piece? Because it will come up in sex. How do we massage and work with that piece so that the like kind of integrity of that desire is really there? Instead of it being sort of muddied by the trauma, it's like, how can we genuinely experience the capacity of pleasure in a power dynamic, like dominant and submissive? And so, like relational work and sexuality work is really about, in a way, getting clear about what you want. It's about developing some skills you may have not had before. So for example, like it sounds like I might say this and you're like, that sounds kind of like odd. You would think we would know that sort of stuff, but it's kind of wild how many people, for example, do not know what their needs are, do not know how to communicate their needs, do not know how to communicate a boundary. And it's like, to be in any healthy relationship, being able to communicate that, being able to know that is a necessity. And so it's like, sometimes that is like a relational skill we have to develop. Sometimes we have to develop deeper communication skills, like nonviolent communication, to be able to work through conflict in a deeper way, or to even understand how to have a repair conversation so that we can have resolution that creates more trust, more connection, more intimacy. And there are sort of like skills involved that need to happen in that. Relational and sexuality work is also really about, like if I think about skills, for example, maybe taking that to sexuality, you know, a lot of us have been conditioned into a very specific dynamic of sex that is very driven by porn. And that pixelation of sex through porn comes from disconnection, disembodiment of the body. It does not really bring the body fully into the picture in some ways. And so it's like, sometimes to be able to have those deeper states of orgasm, different types of orgasms, to be just more orgasmic and to experience like deeper ecstasy in sex, you have to come back to some like really basic skills of sex, of just like, how do we breathe through sex? Are we using our breath in sex? How do we use our sound as a way to expand our pleasure, to also like let go of things that are coming up that need to be let go of, to open up wider to the, you know, the pleasure, the orgasm that's available to us in this moment? How do we like move our bodies in a way that moves the energy to, say, have a full body orgasm? Simple things like that. But again, like a lot of us don't track those types of skills into sex. And so we just have this disembodied experience of sex. So aside from like the skill building that is kind of obvious in relational and sexuality work, it's also really about like getting clear on what you want and being able to build the capacity for that and digesting what's getting in the way of that through a relational way or through a sexual way. For example, like in sex, we can actually use it as a way to alchemize the shadow. We can use pleasure to alchemize our shadow. And in that, we create more space for like what is available, what we want to have available, versus playing out shadow. In relationship, for example, so polarity is what we sort of track as like attraction and chemistry. So there's that whole kind of belief system in the world that like all of that goes away. We only have the honeymoon phase and then it's all hell from there. And it's like, that is not true at all. If you're aware of what polarity is, if you're aware of how to cultivate that in your own body and hold that, if you have a maturity of sort of the different energetics that are involved in that, and you're able to attune to a higher like kind of experience of like, not as what is my preference of how I want to show up in this moment to create sort of polarity, but like what is the moment asking of me, which is kind of more of a divine stage kind of skill. That is a relational skill of like how we get to have that juice, that aliveness, that polarity always available. Also, the relational skill of recognizing not every single moment with polarity, like, you know, that is where sexual chemistry comes from. Not every moment of life, of a relational life, has to be like, wow, like I'm just so enthralled by you. I want to fuck you. I want to rip your clothes off. Although that's a great experience to have. We love that. But sometimes it's like simplistically like, you know what? We got to figure out how we're going to do the grocery store today. We got to like, and we're all kind of in the same energetic about that. There's not all this chemistry. But when you realize again that you know how to kind of keep sexual polarity alive, that sexual chemistry alive, it invites the idea of like, how do we stay tethered to that energy, even if it's not like a full-blown expression of that energy, even if we're not in a sexual moment, but how do we tune into that energetic frequency? How do we, and in that way, that's actually the invitation to more play, more aliveness, more pleasure in these kind of like fleeting tussle moments of everyday life where it's like going to the grocery store can be a very fun, playful experience with your partner that if you know how to wield that experience, it can very much be like the way that you're interacting allows for you to be able to like say, come home and go immediately into sex instead of being really far away from that experience. And all of these things are part of what allows us to move into a deeper experience of intimacy than maybe we have seen, maybe we have known. And this sacred stage within relational and sexuality work is really that dance between the digestion and the alchemy and the calling forth of something. And that is very different in a way than sort of it, and it's the interweaving, but it is different. And I find often that it's like you have to sort of say yes to like some of that deeper healing or that trauma resolution work first. But there becomes an initiation where you're like, I remember this distinctly for myself. Like, I had been doing some trauma resolution work and I was like, yeah, I'm doing it. I'm healing. Woo. And then I had this experience with this man and he agreed to be my boyfriend. I'll tell the story one day. But then 2 days later, he's like, nah, man, can't do it. Don't find you sexually attractive. And I was like, oh, no. And then it was COVID and I was by myself and it was just like heartbreak. And I was like, oh. But then like that beautiful moment, although painful, it really made me, it wasn't from the healthiest space, I'll admit that. But there was this realization of like, why does he not find me sexually attractive? And again, like he just genuinely may not. That's totally true. But it was a question that invited me into like, am I really connected to my sexuality? Like, do I even really know what it means to me to feel like sexually attractive or to like bring that energy forward? Do I even know what that is? And the answer at that time was no. And when I realized that, it was like, you know what? Like, it's not just like trauma resolution work I need to do. Like, I actually have to like go into the thing that scares me in a like resourced with capacity, like choosing kind of way of like, I actually have to go into a relational field. I have to go into like sexuality in a certain way at that time to actually work at it in a way that it needs to be worked, that can't just happen through like sitting in a therapeutic office and being like, oh, here's what's happening in my body. Let's breathe through it. Although that's very important, it's a little bit different. And so it's very important to me, again, like all these things, one, like are all bringing us back to the body. They're all built on the foundation of being in the body. And to recognize there's a little distinction and that every bit of these is important when we're talking about the path of sacred intimacy. Because there it does become a certain threshold, especially when you've experienced sexual or relational trauma, that's like you do have to do a level of work on your own. There is that inner relationship to yourself that must be built. And if you don't actually go to the thing that does activate you and work at it in that moment and with the support, the love, the witnessing of another human in a way that you did not get to receive before, you can't truly digest some of the material, some of the relational, sexual kind of trauma material. And it's scary to think about it that way, but it's so true. And so having spaces built for that is very different than trauma resolution, but all of it needs to coexist because it is coexisting. It is. And in that, I think another big piece about the sacred intimacy path that I think is really profound to think about it this way. Every relationship is a container for growth, is a container for healing. It is an initiation. Even if you, for example, are only in a relating container, like in a partnership of some sort with someone for a few months, it is an initiation. It's an opportunity to learn something about yourself. It's an opportunity to grow, not just for you, but for the other person as well. And in some ways, like you both have like come to each other to learn and grow together. And it's like, you can have profound intimacy and connection in this container. And like we can call each other into a higher state. And I will admit, like I'm not a parent. I don't know this, but I've heard this a lot from parents where it's like being a parent, having a relationship to your child will call you into a level of healing and growth and love that you didn't even know was possible. And it's like, how do you receive that? How do you take that on? And when you view intimacy as a way of being, as a path, And a path with different initiations, those moments that are really hard that you come into, that it's like, oh, God, why? No, I don't want to do that. You can shift that because you're like, you know what? Like, this is coming up for good reason. And yes, I get to choose because sometimes like the initiation is to be like, actually, that's not for me. I'm a no to that. But when it is a yes for you, even though you might have resistance and fear and all the things, it's like, wow, I could, like, what could be here? There's a curiosity, there's an openness. And in that whatever is there to, like, whatever that's container, that relationship is inviting you to remember and to move into and embrace, it will come forth. The wisdom that's needed will come forth. But you have to be like with that human experience of the resistance and of also the yes, of the choosing of it. And that's what makes it a path and an initiatory path, a way of being. And it's that devotion again of just like, I don't know what's here for me. I don't know like what I'm doing here. I just know that there's a thread that calls me, that pulls me into this. And I trust that is in the highest good of all. And I'm going to lean into that. I'm going to lean into what this is here to show me. I'm going to lean into what I get to offer to another person for their growth, their initiation. And like, what do we get to experience together when we're growing, when we're alchemizing, when we're co-creating together? How even does that help us? This phrase comes to mind of like making the magic out of our messes. How do we remember how divine and holy and sacred we are by fully being a yes, a fuck yes to the human, messy, wounding, traumas, fears, pains, all the things that we have that we're working with that come into the field. And it's just kind of a spiral up, a continuation, a cycling of just like forgetting, remembering, being in the mess and the magic on the other side, and how all that just helps us grow and really become the highest expression, the highest version of ourselves in terms of our truth and what we came here for. And in that is what the path of sacred intimacy is about. And so as this podcast expands, as also my business grows and expands, there will be so much offering around working in this framework and developing the skill, being in the practice spaces that invite us into this kind of work deeply. And not just alone, but together. In couples, in community, and just like co-creative kind of spaces. And so I hope that within this episode, I hope that maybe it illuminates something for you that you hadn't thought of before, but more deeply, whatever your desires are in intimacy, even if you haven't fully remembered them or you don't fully know them, I hope that somehow you're able to connect to them a little bit deeper today. That even if they scare you, even if you don't know what they are meant to be or what to become or how to do them or all that you're just like, I trust why I feel called to this. And I want to lean in. I want to enter this path, and I want to enter my path of intimacy, of sacred intimacy. I want to be a yes to that because I know that is in the highest calling of myself and everyone that will be involved. And at the end of the day, no matter what it unfolds as and what happens in it, all of it is an invitation to more truth, to liberation, and to more aliveness. And I think at the crux of everything that we want to experience and that we have desires for and what we're called to do and all the things, when it all shakes out in really simplistic terms, we're all here to just be more alive and to be more liberated. And intimacy can be one of the most profound paths towards that, I think. So If anything in this episode has stirred something in you, has awoken something in you, you have this curiosity to just go deeper in, I really want to invite you and tell you more about the next intimate step session. So this is a 75-minute one-on-one session with me designed to help you experience one shift that will transform your intimate life while initiating your unique path to deeper intimacy. Together, we'll take one of your intimacy challenges and we will work through it with personalized body-based inquiry and embodiment practices and processes. And as a launch special for this podcast, I am offering these sessions for just $60, which they're normally $150. So this is a great deal. And there are only 16 sessions. So once they're gone, they are gone. The sessions are now available, and they will be available for a little bit longer until Sunday, April 19th at 11:59 p.m. So if you feel called, I really want to invite you to step into it right here, right now. Do not wait. Hear that call, wield that call, lean into it. And if you're leaning into it, you can find the link to purchase your session in the show notes below. And again, I just want to take a moment to just offer you my gratitude for being here, offering my gratitude for you being present and opening yourself, and being a yes to the path of sacred intimacy. Sending you love. Thank you for walking the path with me today. You're feeling called to go deeper. Everything you need is at thesacredintimacytemple.com. Join the community there to stay connected and be the first to know about new episodes, offerings, and what's coming up inside the temple next. And if this episode moves something within you, share it with a friend who's ready. I'll see you in the next episode. Come home to the temple within.